In the initial hectic early morning hours of September 11, 2001, in which we saw American Airlines Flight 11 crash into the North Tower and United Airlines Flight 175 crash into the South Tower, the entire world, along with its embattered city, New York City, watching full view of the downtown skyline. One small woman living in New Jersey, Union City, New Jersey, decided to listen to the news on her radio, in which she got a phone call from a friend stating that she should watch with her binoculars what is happening at the World Trade Center. And so this woman by the name of Maria, I will not use her last name. Her last name is actually redacted in the FBI report, but I know her last name. But I won't say it here to keep her anonymous. She decides to go to the window to view downtown Manhattan from her window. And the name of her apartment is Doric Towers. And so she has a vast view of Lower Manhattan. That's where Union City, New Jersey. Jersey City, I'm sorry. And so as she's looking with her binoculars, she hears a commotion and she points downward. And in the parking lot, right below her window, she notices three individuals near a white truck, and they were celebrating, high-fiving each other, which was quite a shock to Maria, suggesting that the horror that's unfolding right before their very eyes. It would seem rather unusual, suspicious, to say the least. And so she notices all the three men getting in the truck. And so with her binoculars, she managed to catch the license plate of this truck. And she wrote it down. And the license plate was JRJ13Y, in which she waited for her husband to come home to see if she should call the police or the authorities about what she saw. Her husband came home from jury duty. They talked about it, and he agreed that she should notify the authorities, in which she did. She called the East Rutherford Police Department. And I'll be on the lookout for this truck with the license plate that she described. Was an all points bulletin to be on the lookout for this truck. By 3:51 p.m., with most of the New York bridges and parkways under strict surveillance and lockdown, and with the North and South Tower collapsed, the New Jersey Turnpike was completely jammed with people who were trying to leave the city as well as people getting in. East Rutherford Police Officer Scott DiCarlo and Sergeant Dennis Ravelli was in charge of directing the heavy traffic at the New Jersey Turnpike. When DiCarlo noticed a white van fitting the description of the Bolo, to be on the lookout, when it was approaching the officers. The white van had all but one number, according to DiCarlo, which was close enough for him on the license plate. So DiCarlo actually told the truck to pull over to the shoulder, away from traffic, in which the truck did. DiCarlo went toward the driver's side window, and Ravelli went toward the passenger side window. DiCarlo then shouted for the driver, Sivan Kurzberg, to exit the vehicle, in which Sivan Kurzberg didn't acknowledge DiCarlo's commands. And DiCarlo, again, this time with more authority behind his voice, told him to exit the vehicle, and Kurzberg again neglected to do just that. And DiCarlo, according to him, he actually opened the car door, the truck door, and forcibly removed him. And DiCarlo had his gun out already, and so did Ravelli. So Ravelli actually ordered the rest of the passengers out. And instead of 3 individuals that the Maria woman stated she saw, there were actually 5. But as the DiCarlo was pulling Steve von Kersberg out of his truck, Steve von Kersberg would actually make this statement, which actually was quite bizarre, in which he tells Scott DiCarlo, "We are not your problem. The Palestinians are your problem. Your problem are our problems." This would be rather bizarre of a declaration to make. Why would he say that? Pretty strange. The 5 men in the truck would later turn out to be Steve von Kersberg, the driver, his brother, Paul Kersberg, Yaron Schmel, Oded Elner, and Yaron Omar Mamre. And all 5 are Israeli nationals. And they all worked for Urban Moving Systems, which is located in Weehawken, New Jersey. In Steve von Kersberg, he has $4,700 stuffed in his sock, while he had passports for Germany and Israel. They also found a road map highlighted with Doric Towers in the World Trade Center and other areas, which made DiCarlo and Ravelli quite suspicious. And so they were transported to Bergen County Jail, in which they were then relieved to the FBI's Foreign Counterintelligence Section. And it was here that they were interrogated by the FBI and the New York Joint Terrorism Task Force. At around the same time, while this was happening, 2 other Israeli movers from Urban Moving Systems were also pulled over on September 11th. But they were actually released and let go. The next day, on September 12th, they were actually pulled over again and detained. And I'll get to that in a bit because that's a lot more interesting. When the FBI decided to interrogate these 5 men, Paul Kersberg would actually take the first polygraph test, and he failed on all accounts. And then the rest of them refused to take their polygraphs. But then, after a couple of days, they decided to take it, and every single one of them failed. So, in time, the Israeli ambassador to the United States, David Irving, along with Harvard chair and lawyer Alan Dershowitz, acting as a mediator, along with 2 unnamed New York senators, one of them probably being Chuck Schumer, were in talks with the Israeli government about having these Israelis released. And after 71 days under protesting FBI agents, they were released back to Israel. On September 12th, we'll get back to the 2 in Pennsylvania. 2 men who were driving from Chicago back to New Jersey were detained in York, Pennsylvania by Pennsylvania state troopers. The truck was an Urban Moving Systems trucks, and by this time, the news in Massachusetts, in New York, were broadcasting these white trucks that were deemed suspicious, and they were under a be on the lookout for. And so the 2 men, who later turned out to be Roy Barak and Modi Butbul, were not only Israeli nationalists, but they were also Israeli Mossad officers who worked in the electronics division. And they were a lot more serious arrests than, say, the 5 Israelis who were later dubbed the Dancing Israelis, even though they weren't dancing. But the original nickname was the 5-Fivers. But the media dubbed them the Dancing Israelis. And so the catchphrase still is caught on today. Meanwhile, while the Pennsylvania state troopers were interviewing Modi Butbul and Roy Barak, they were saying, well, where were you coming from? in which Roy Brock says we were doing a move from a client from Chicago to New Jersey. When they looked at the truck was empty. So they were then detained by the FBI. As such, the FBI then called the manager of Urban Moving Systems, and it was Dominic Suter, who's the manager. Dominic Suter answered, and the FBI actually stated that, did you have these two men out on a work detail? And according to Dominic Suter, he says the following: no, because of the days prior events, we had no clients outside of New Jersey. And so when they explained about Modi Bupul and Roy Brock having a client move from Chicago to New Jersey, Dominic Suter explained that, yes, that's strange. I don't know why they would say that. While the FBI was left to pick up the pieces of what was left in the warehouse, because when the FBI actually called Dominic Suter for a second interview, Dominic Suter decides not only is he not doing the interview, he's actually fleeing back to Israel and leaving a warehouse full of clients' orders, furniture, months behind. Quite strange, leaving a whole company behind with no employees, because most employees were actually detained. And a couple of the American employees that they interviewed, the FBI did an interview, which is actually, I'm going to link the FBI redacted report, but according to the employees of Urban Moving Systems that weren't Israelis, they stated that many times the Israeli employees would denigrate the United States. According to one report from an unnamed individual, his name is blacked out, he states that he heard that one of the Israeli nationals were telling him that give us 20 years, we'll take control of your media and we'll take control of your country. What that meant in the long run, I don't know. This was before 9/11 attacks were happening. And whether that actual discussion took place, take it with a grain of salt, because it's coming from an employee of Urban Moving Systems. Then you have to ask yourself, why would they lie? But who knows? But in November of 2001, Israeli TV decides to interview Paul Kurzberg and Omar Mamre and Oded Elner. But it was Paul Kurzberg who was doing the talking. And according to the famous clip where Paul Kurzberg says, yes, we were there to document the event, and state that they were there just to film the attacks. Oh, they didn't state that they were celebrating. I guess that was left out of the interview. A couple of months later, in June of 2002, 2020's John Miller decides to do a segment. And it's a pretty hard segment to find these days, but if you can, you should watch it, because they're the only segment that actually got inside the warehouse of Urban Moving Systems. The story gives some insight as to why they were released, but shortly after the segment, it seemed that public interest regarding the story died on the vine. Even the media made light of the subject, calling them the dancing Israelis. The story seemed to be forgotten altogether. However, few independent reporters came out just shortly after. People like Justin Raimondo, Ryan Dawson, Mike Riviero, who decided to bring up this story that was suddenly forgotten. And why was it forgotten? Well, it comes out later through the FBI reports that these Israelis were actually monitoring members of the Hamburg Cell, Mohamed Atta, Marwan al-Shehhi, and Ziad Jarrah. But even though Ziad Jarrah lived on his own, and he would live in apartments in Virginia, New Jersey, Florida. Meanwhile, Mohamed Atta lived in New York, New Jersey, and Florida. And it came out later that not only were Urban Moving Systems had Israeli national spies working for their moving company, so did Classic International Movers, which is a moving company in New Jersey and in Florida, Max Movers, Moishi Movers, White Glove Movers. And so a couple of months later, some photographs were released. A couple of years later, photographs were released, 10 photographs, under a FOIA request regarding these Urban Moving Systems dancing Israelis. but their faces are blacked out. You can't see their faces, and the atmosphere behind them is whited out, so you can't see the downtown skyline. But it does show them being there on September 11th, and it seems that they were holding up lighters and celebrating and whatnot. There was also reports of the FBI regarding their interviews with Doric Tower residences, stating that some of the urban moving system employees were there even on September 10th, 2001. So why is this important? And why is this a story that was forgotten altogether in the preceding years of 9/11? Well, basically, it's because the anti-Semitic remarks that would come from it, which is normal, but also that this would shadow that the Israeli government, or the Israeli Mossad, actually had intelligence unit teams monitoring not just Hamas operatives inside the United States, but also members of the Hamburg Cell as well. And why they did not inform the FBI? Why did they not inform the State Department of these covert operations that they were undertaking inside the United States? It wasn't just the Israelis who were monitoring the hijackers, but the Saudis as well. But I got into that subject a couple of days ago. I did a video regarding that. But I just wanted to do this short little interview regarding the Israeli operatives that were monitoring the hijackers, not just in New York, but also in Florida and in Jersey. And according to objects that were found in Omar Mamre, Omar Mamre also had an ID card for Florida, Hollywood, Florida. And he lived not so far away from the residence of Mohamed Atta and Marwan al-Shehhi, who also lived in Hollywood, Florida. So that's pretty interesting in its own right. And the phone numbers that were collected from Urban Moving Systems truck, which showed that there were phone numbers connecting them to the other moving companies I just outlined before. Also, to bring this up as well, when the bomb-sniffing dogs were called for the Urban Moving Systems truck, in the back where there was moving blankets, which was protecting furniture, but there's hardly anything in the truck, which was pretty strange for a moving company anyway. But needless to say, maybe they didn't have a client that day. So maybe that was the reason why they had an empty truck. But according to the FBI report, the bomb-sniffing dogs actually detected a faint smell of explosive residue on one of the blankets. What did that mean? I don't know, because the information regarding what was found on the blankets is redacted. And so John Masseria, an independent journalist himself, filed a Freedom of Information request regarding the hard drive computers that were in Urban Moving System warehouse, and he tried to get the copies of the hard drives. He was denied this. Instead, in replacement, he was given the FBI report and the East Rutherford Police report, which isn't redacted, but the FBI report is redacted. I'll link below to both reports regarding the FBI and the East Rutherford report. But it's interesting to note that here we have another foreign intelligence operation ring operating inside the United States without the acknowledgement of the Department of Justice, the FBI, or Department of State at all, regarding why. Why didn't they do this? Why didn't they inform them of what they were doing and what they were monitoring and who they were monitoring? But like I said, don't use speculation as a form of evidence, and keep your prejudicial worldviews outside. If because I know a lot of people within the truth movement like to blame Israel for the 9/11 attacks, which I find to be quite ludicrous. There's no evidence for this, but you can say, at the very least, that a certain section of the Israeli Mossad most likely had foreknowledge of the events. We could probably make a really good argument for that, in which the FBI report, you can see for yourself, the FBI agent who files a report at the end, near the end of the report, he states what is the reason for detaining these 5 Israeli nationals. And if it was for just that we found no reason to keep them and other to interrogate them, a simple no would suffice, or a couple of sentences, but a page and a half is actually redacted of the answer. And it comes out later that the FBI actually thinks that they knew more than what they were telling the FBI while they were being detained. And why this great pressure by these Israeli ambassadors here in the United States and to these 2 unnamed New York senators, why they were pressured by the Israeli government to release these people, and in such a rush, because the FBI wasn't done with them. They actually wanted to interrogate them more and keep them more, detain them longer, but they were overridden, most likely by higher-ups in the State Department. Sounds familiar? Because that's exactly what happened with with Omar al-Bayoumi and Osama Basnan and the Saudis who were monitoring Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi and Hani Hanjour out west, and the bin Laden family and all the Saudi dignitaries here in the United States, where the FBI actually wanted to detain some of them and talk about, interview some of them regarding what they feel was there may be a connection, a financial connection with some of the hijackers. But the State Department actually gave the okay for the private charter jets to fly out of Kentucky, Massachusetts, where most of the bin Laden family was, and under the dismissal of Richard Clark, in which Clark, the National Security Council, actually didn't want for them to leave right away. He actually thought that maybe some of these people may have some information regarding the attacks. But as you can see, the 2 most powerful lobbies inside the United States having immense power within our top levels of government once again. So that's all I wanted to say for now. I didn't get too much into the other Israeli spy rings that were inside the United States operating at the same time. One was a drug ring, and of course the biggest ring of all was the Israeli art student ring, in which they were monitoring federal agencies such as the FBI and the DEA by going to the house and selling them cheap art, and in which they said was listing devices in some of these paintings that they were selling. I'll link also below the Gerald Shehhi memo, in which Gerald Shehhi, who's a Chicago lawyer, he's retired now, did a report. He tried to send this report regarding this massive ring of Israelis that were inside the United States monitoring not just the hijacking teams of 9/11, but also to many other terrorist operatives from Hamas and other Israeli Arab terrorist groups as well, without knowledge of the State Department or the Department of Justice. And so I'll link that to you too below the video. But I was going to mention too that I know a large contingent of the truth movement love to blame Israel for the attacks of 9/11. I know I mentioned this before, but I plead with you not to allow your prejudice for Israel itself to overcome your common decency and your when it comes to research, responsible research. If you're only going to look at evidence that implicates Israelis, you're not going to find much, but you'll also find plenty of people who love to blame Israel for everything under the sun, one of them being Christopher Bolin, who I think is one of the worst 9/11 researchers out there today. He's full of misinformation. And there's others as well. I'm not going to go into them. But yeah, there's information out there, reputable information and data, which shows that, yes, the Israeli spy agency, the Mossad, was operating inside the United States without acknowledgement from our State Department or the FBI regarding their monitoring of the Hamburg Cell in the East Coast. We know that much as well. But we can't just simply blame them for the 9/11 attacks because they didn't hijack the planes. Whether they knew that the operation was going to happen before it happened, well, we still have yet to have information regarding that. I'm not saying that they don't have it, but we can't just allow our prejudice for Israel to come into play and blame them for the attacks. That's all I really wanted to say, because I see this all too often on viral media, in which you have a lot of people that love to blame them for everything under the sun. And so for you respectable researchers out there that are very serious and studious and careful, that's my warning to you. Don't allow your prejudice for Muslims or Jews to come into play here, in which you're only going to look at information that agrees with your worldview. That's not what my channel is about. And that's not what I hope you're about, because I want you to learn from mistakes that these people make. And, that's what the basis of my channel is. My channel is an educational channel. I try to be as unbiased and unprejudiced as I can be, and only look at the information and evidence as I can, and try to promote that here on this channel for you.